Raffi never imagined a normal evening shift could turn into something that would change his entire life. He had been working at the spaceport for years, and most nights were the same quiet halls, blinking control panels, and the steady humming of ships that came and went. He liked the silence. It gave him space to think. He wasn't someone who talked much, and people often found him too reserved. But he didn't mind. He preferred machines anyway. They didn't judge or ask questions. That night, he was fixing a loose panel on an old cargo shuttle when the ground suddenly shook. It wasn't the usual vibration from a landing craft. It felt heavier, harsher, almost like something had been thrown at the planet. Raffi froze for a second, his wrench still in hand. Then the alarm lights blinked red across the dock walls. A crash alert. He dropped the tool and hurried outside. A trail of smoke cut across the night sky. The smoke wasn't the usual gray. It glowed faintly blue, sparkling in a strange way he had never seen in human ships. Before he could call the control room, the damaged craft shot past overhead and slammed into the landing field, just beyond the maintenance hangars. Raffi didn't think. He just ran. Security was minutes away. He knew how slow they were on night shifts. If there were survivors, every second mattered. He sprinted across the field, the smell of burnt metal filling the air. When he reached the crash site, he slowed a little. The ship didn't look like anything he recognized. Human crafts always had sharp angles and standard markings. This one was rounder, softer in shape, with strange patterns along its outer shell. The hatch was half open. A low, broken humming sound came from inside. Raffi swallowed and stepped closer. "Hello? Anyone inside?" "I'm here to help." His voice echoed, but there was no answer. He pulled the hatch open. The interior was dim, lit by a couple of flickering strips that barely worked. Something was moving inside. Raffi's heart started to pound as he leaned forward. For a moment, he thought maybe it was just equipment sliding around. But then he heard a soft, frightened whimper. He climbed into the wrecked craft. When his eyes adjusted, he finally saw them. A woman, at least she looked somewhat like a woman, was leaning against a cracked control panel. Her skin had a faint shimmer, not like makeup or human skin tone, but like she reflected starlight even in darkness. Her hair was long but floated slightly, as if it didn't obey gravity. She held a small child close to her chest, shielding the little one with her own body. The child looked more human than she did. Big eyes, soft face, but the same faint glow on the skin. When the woman saw Raffi, she flinched. Her arms tightened around the child. "It's okay," Raffi said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're hurt. Let me help." She didn't speak in words he understood, but she whispered something to the child. The sound was musical, gentle, but filled with fear. Raffi couldn't understand the language, yet he somehow understood the feeling behind it. Fear, pain, protection. He took another slow step toward them. "Security will be here soon," he muttered, mostly to himself. "If they see you like this—" He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. Everyone in the spaceport knew how security treated unknown beings. Rules were strict. If a creature wasn't registered or approved, they were taken away, usually to some lab far from the public eye. Raffi had seen it happen once. It wasn't something he ever wanted to see again. The woman seemed to sense his worry. Her eyes focused on his face, studying him carefully. Then she did something he didn't expect. She reached out a trembling hand, as if asking for help. The child clung to her side, watching Raffi with wide, curious eyes. Raffi didn't hesitate. He gently took the woman's hand and helped her stand. She winced, holding her side. It looked like she had been hit by shrapnel. The child reached for Raffi's shirt, gripping it like he was already familiar. "Come on," he whispered. "We can't stay here." He helped them down from the craft, looking around the field. No security yet, but the scan towers had definitely picked up the crash. He had maybe a few minutes. The child stumbled, and Raffi picked them up without thinking. The small body was warm, lighter than he expected, and the faint glow seemed to soften when he held them. The child buried their face against his shoulder, almost like they trusted him instantly. Something tightened in Raffi's chest. He wasn't used to being trusted, especially not this fast. He guided the woman across the landing field. She moved slowly, breathing hard, but she didn't let go of Raffi's arm. Her eyes darted everywhere, nervous and alert, like she expected someone to attack them at any moment. "It's okay," he whispered again. "Just hold on." He led them behind the maintenance hangars, where the old storage tunnel doors were half broken and barely used. Most workers didn't even know they still existed. Raffi did, because he used them often to avoid crowded hallways. He opened the metal door. It creaked loudly, making the woman flinch. "Sorry," he murmured. "We'll be safe inside." They slipped into the dark tunnel. Raffi shut the door behind them. The tunnel smelled like dust and old wiring, but it was better than being out in the open. The woman leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. Raffi crouched beside her. "You're injured. I need to check the wound. Is that okay?" She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Slowly, she nodded. Raffe reached carefully toward her side. When he touched the area around the wound, she gasped and gripped his arm. The pain was bad. The wound wasn't deep, but something inside it glowed faintly, like her blood wasn't normal blood. He pulled his hand away. "I'll fix it," he said quickly. "I can get supplies. But you can't make any noise, and you need to stay hidden." The child tugged his sleeve gently. Raffi smiled a little. "I'll be back. I promise." Before he stood up, the woman grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes locked onto his. She said a single word in her language. He didn't know its meaning, but he felt something behind it, fear mixed with trust. She didn't want him to leave, but she believed he would return. Raffi placed his hand over hers. "I'm coming back," he whispered. "I won't leave you." He slipped out of the tunnel and hurried toward the supply station. His mind raced. If anyone caught him helping unknown beings, he could lose his job or worse. But he couldn't just abandon them. Not after seeing the child cling to him. Not after seeing the fear in the woman's eyes. Whatever they had run from, it had been terrifying. He gathered basic medical supplies and moved fast, pretending it was a routine repair job. A couple of workers crossed his path, but no one questioned him. They rarely did. Just as he reached the tunnel door again, he heard the distant whir of security drones. They were scanning the crash site. "Too close," he whispered under his breath. He slipped inside the tunnel and closed the door just before a searchlight passed. Outside, the woman opened her eyes when he approached, relief softening her tense expression. Raffi knelt beside her again and carefully treated the wound. The glowing substance in her blood worried him, but once he cleaned the area, it began to dim, almost like it reacted to calmness. The child sat beside him, resting a tiny hand on his knee the whole time, as if trying to comfort him back. When he finished, he sat on the floor, exhausted but relieved. The woman watched him silently before gently pressing her fingertips to his forehead, an unfamiliar gesture, but it felt like gratitude. Raffi didn't know what he had gotten himself into. He only knew one thing: these two weren't dangerous. They were scared, and they needed someone. And for the first time in a long time, Raffi felt like he had a purpose that mattered. He looked at the woman and the child sitting in the shadows of the old tunnel. He didn't know who they were, where they came from, or why they had crashed near the spaceport, but he knew this much: He wasn't going to let anyone take them. Not while he still had breath in his lungs. Raffi couldn't sleep. He had tried to rest after the long night of chaos, but his mind kept replaying what had happened at the crash site. He kept thinking about the woman and the child hidden in the storage tunnel. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the child's big, frightened eyes and the way the woman had pressed her glowing fingertips to his forehead as if to thank him. That gesture stayed with him, haunting and comforting at the same time. He walked quietly to the edge of the hangar and peeked outside. The night was calm now. The security drones had returned to their patrols, but their scanners would be active soon. He knew he couldn't stay in the storage tunnel for long without supplies. He needed a plan, and he needed help even if he had to do everything alone. Raffi decided to return to the tunnel. He moved as quietly as he could, carrying a small backpack with medical supplies, rations, and a flashlight. When he opened the door, the woman and the child were sitting together, their forms small against the shadows. The child looked at him and gave a tiny smile, the first one since he had met them. Raffi knelt and placed the supplies beside them. "We need food," he said softly. The woman didn't respond with words, but she nodded, understanding. The child clutched a small container of water and tried to drink, spilling a little on his glowing skin. Raffi chuckled quietly, and the tension eased just a little. The woman motioned toward him, her eyes full of concern. Raffi realized she wanted to know what was happening outside. He hesitated. Could he explain what humans were planning to do to them? He shook his head slightly. "Not now," he whispered. "It's dangerous. They will come if they know you are here. We need to be careful." The woman seemed to understand, though her eyes flicked nervously toward the tunnel entrance. She held the child close and whispered in her strange, melodic language. Raffi listened. The words were incomprehensible, but he could sense the urgency and fear behind them. They were both terrified of being discovered. He felt a deep pang of sympathy dot over the next few hours. Raffi tried to think. How had they ended up here? Why had they crashed? And why was this woman so desperate to hide? Every possibility he imagined seemed worse than the last. He knew that if the authorities found them, the woman and child could be taken away, experimented on, or worse. His heart ached at the thought. He had never been the type to get involved in other people's problems. But this was different. These weren't just people. They were beings in need of protection. He sat against the wall and studied them in the dim light. The child had fallen asleep, leaning against the woman's chest. Her head rested lightly on her knees, and she seemed exhausted. Raffi's mind wandered. He didn't understand her species, but he could feel the bond between them. It was clear she loved the child more than anything. And now, somehow, she was trusting him. The weight of that trust was heavy dot suddenly. He heard a faint sound outside the tunnel, a metallic scrape, soft but deliberate. Raffi froze. The sound came again, closer this time. Someone was searching. He didn't know if it was security or someone else. He motioned for the woman to stay quiet, then slowly crept toward the tunnel door. Peeking outside, he saw a small group of men in dark uniforms, carrying scanners and weapons. They were moving cautiously, scanning for life forms. Raffi's stomach dropped. They had found the crash site and were now searching the surrounding areas. He ducked back into the tunnel. "They're here," he whispered to the woman. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. The child stirred, but didn't wake fully. Raffi clenched his fists. He had to act fast. Leaving the tunnel wasn't an option. They would be discovered immediately. He decided to wait. The men were systematic, but slow. Raffi hoped they would move on, but his instincts told him they wouldn't leave without a thorough search. He couldn't risk the woman and child being caught. His mind raced for solutions. He remembered an old service corridor, that ran parallel to the hangar. It was narrow, barely used, and could provide a hidden escape route. Raffi whispered instructions to the woman, pointing toward the corridor. She hesitated, but finally nodded. He gently lifted the child and motioned for her to follow. They moved slowly, keeping to the shadows. Every step was tense. Every creak of the metal floor made Raffi's heart pound. He could feel the sweat running down his back. If they were discovered now, there would be no chance to run. Finally, they reached the corridor. It was dim, dusty, and smelled of old metal, but it was safe for now. Raffi let the woman and child sit while he inspected the passage. It was long and winding, but it would lead them away from the main hangar and the prying eyes of the authorities. "We'll need to keep moving," he whispered. "We can't stay here long. They will search every corner." The woman nodded, her expression calm but tense. The child clung to Raffi's arm, and he felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. He had never cared for anyone like this before. As they moved deeper into the corridor, Raffi thought about what they might encounter outside the spaceport. He didn't know if they could survive in the city, where cameras and patrols were everywhere. He realized they would need a place to hide until they could figure out what to do next. He remembered an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It hadn't been used in years, and security rarely patrolled that area. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it would be safe. He decided they would go there. The journey would be risky, but staying in the spaceport was even more dangerous. The woman looked at him, as if sensing his thoughts. She reached out and touched his arm gently. Raffi felt a strange warmth at the contact. It wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, almost like a silent agreement. She trusted him, and he wouldn't betray that trust. They moved cautiously through the city streets, keeping to alleys and shadows. The child occasionally looked around with wide eyes, fascinated by the lights and sounds, but Raffi kept him close. Every step was careful, every turn calculated. They couldn't afford to be seen. After what felt like hours, they reached the edge of the city. The abandoned warehouse loomed ahead, dark and silent. Raffi led them inside. It was empty, dusty, and cold, but it offered shelter. The woman and child settled into a corner, and Raffi began to assess what they had. He unpacked the supplies he had brought and shared food and water. The child ate quickly, still tired but clearly relieved. The woman watched him silently, her glowing eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and worry. Raffi felt a strange bond forming. He was not just their helper. Now he was their protector. Night turned into early morning, and Raffi couldn't stop thinking about the future. He knew this was only the beginning. The authorities wouldn't give up. The security team would keep looking, and they would stop at nothing to capture the woman and child. Raffi realized he was taking on a dangerous responsibility, one that could cost him everything. But as he watched the child sleeping peacefully and the woman resting, he knew he couldn't turn back. They depended on him. And somehow, even though he didn't fully understand why, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The first night in the warehouse was quiet but tense. Raffi stayed awake for most of it, listening to every sound outside, ready to react. He didn't want to leave their side. When the first light of dawn filtered through the broken windows, he allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. They had survived the night. That was enough for now. As he looked at them, Raffi realized something else. He had never felt this kind of connection before. It was more than sympathy. It was responsibility, yes, but also something deeper, something almost like family. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let anyone hurt them. And so, with the morning light streaming in and the city beginning to stir, Raffi prepared for the next challenge. The security team would not stop searching. He would need courage, patience, and cleverness to protect the woman and child. but he felt a strange confidence rising within him. Somehow they would survive. Somehow they would stay together. For now they rested, but Raffi knew that soon the real challenge would begin. And he would face it, not as a worker in a quiet spaceport, but as the protector of two lives that had unexpectedly come into his world. The city never really slept. But for Raffi, it felt like the streets themselves were alive with danger. Every siren, every flicker of lights, every distant footstep made him tense. He had led the woman and child to the abandoned warehouse, and for the first time in hours, they had a moment of quiet. But Raffi knew that peace was temporary. The security forces would not give up easily. They had technology, resources, and authority, while Raffi had only his knowledge of the city and his determination. Still, determination could be enough if he was careful. He watched the child sleep in the corner of the warehouse. The small body rose and fell with shallow breaths. Raffi felt an unusual protective warmth in his chest. He had never imagined caring for someone like this, yet it came naturally. The woman sat nearby, her glowing skin faint in the dim morning light, and watched him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable at first. Then he realized she was not judging or questioning him. She was assessing him, gauging if he could truly keep them safe. And somehow, he felt like he had already failed if anything happened to them. He moved quietly to a workbench at the far end of the warehouse and laid out the few supplies he had scavenged the night before. There were some water rations, dried food, basic medical tools, and a flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them alive temporarily. Raffi checked the window openings. Most were boarded up or blocked with scrap metal. It was safe from casual observation, but not from someone determined to find them. He needed to plan their next move carefully. The woman approached him and spoke in her musical language. Raffi shook his head slightly, indicating he couldn't understand. But he tried to read her expression. She seemed anxious, worried about something he couldn't see. The child stirred and looked up at Raffi, clutching the edge of his sleeve. Raffi knelt and touched the small hand gently. The child's skin had a faint glow that pulsed with each breath, and Raffi couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder mixed with responsibility. He tried to comfort the woman and child with soft words, even if they didn't understand. "We'll be okay," he said. "We just have to stay quiet and stay hidden. No one will find us here." His voice was calm, even as his mind raced. The woman seemed to understand a little from his tone, as she nodded slightly, though her eyes betrayed fear. Raffi knew it was only a matter of time before someone discovered their location dot as the day passed. Raffi explored the warehouse more carefully. He found old service tunnels beneath the building. Dust and debris filled them, but they were intact. He realized these tunnels could provide an emergency escape route if the security team got too close. It was a small relief, but every advantage mattered. He memorized the layout, noting exits and potential hiding spots. Then he returned to the woman and child, sharing what he had found. He pointed toward a side wall of the warehouse and gestured that it could be a safe exit if needed. The woman's eyes softened with understanding, and the child smiled faintly, giving Raffi a warmth that he hadn't felt before. Even in hiding, Raffi needed information. He had seen the security team's patterns before. They were thorough but predictable. They relied on scanners, patrols, and informants. Raffi realized he could use this predictability to his advantage. If he timed their movements carefully, they could avoid detection. He explained this with gestures to the woman, who seemed to grasp the plan immediately. The child clapped softly when Raffi indicated they would move soon. It was a tiny moment, but it lifted Raffi's spirits. Night came quickly. Raffi had rationed what little food they had, and the woman fed the child small pieces of bread while Raffi kept watch. He listened carefully, noting every sound outside. The city was alive with activity, distant vehicles, chatter, and occasional alarms, but nothing unusual yet. Raffi's tension never fully eased. Every shadow could hide someone searching for them. He paced slowly, imagining worst-case scenarios and trying to prepare for each. Suddenly, a faint vibration traveled through the floor. Raffi froze. He moved closer to the source, his heart beating faster. The vibration was too regular to be random. It was a signal, footsteps, or machinery. He looked toward the warehouse doors and windows. The shadows seemed to shift. He realized the security team had tracked their movements somehow, maybe by tracing the supplies he had used or the path they had taken. "Stay back," he whispered to the woman. She pressed the child close, her glowing eyes wide with fear. Raffi grabbed a heavy piece of scrap metal from the corner of the warehouse, holding it like a weapon. His mind raced, but he had to stay calm. Panic would make mistakes. The noise grew louder, echoing through the warehouse. Raffi realized the intruders weren't far. He crouched low and signaled the woman toward the side exit. They moved slowly, silently, toward the hidden tunnel. Every step was tense. Raffi could feel the child trembling in his arms, but he whispered soft, calming words, even if they didn't understand him. His own hands shook, but he refused to show fear. They reached the tunnel just as the intruders entered the main warehouse. Raffi paused and listened. He could hear heavy boots and the faint clinking of equipment. The security team was searching systematically, checking corners, scanning for heat signatures. Raffi's stomach twisted. One wrong move and they would be discovered. He guided the woman and child deeper into the tunnel. It was narrow, dusty, and dark. Raffi used his flashlight sparingly, only to check for obstacles. He kept one hand on the child and the other on the woman's arm, guiding them through twists and turns. The tunnel seemed endless, but Raffi knew it would eventually lead them out of immediate danger. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a secondary storage area. Old crates and shipping containers stacked high. It was safer here. Raffi let them rest while he checked for further threats. The air was stale but breathable. The woman finally sat, cradling the child, her glowing skin dimmed slightly with exhaustion. Raffi felt a pang of guilt. He had dragged them through so much, but there had been no alternative. As they rested, Raffi tried to communicate more with the woman. He pointed to the child and then to himself, trying to convey that he would protect them. She nodded, as if understanding, and whispered softly to the child. Raffi couldn't understand the words, but he felt the warmth of trust growing between them. It was fragile but powerful. Night turned deeper, and Raffi took turns keeping watch. He knew the security team might search again at first light. His eyes never left the entrance. Every sound of movement made him tense, but the woman and child slept peacefully nearby. Raffi felt a sense of pride and responsibility he had never experienced before. This was no longer just helping strangers. They had become part of his life, and he couldn't let anything happen to them. In the quiet moments, Raffi thought about the woman and her child. Who were they? Where had they come from? And why had they crashed near the spaceport? He didn't have answers, but he knew one thing: he had to keep them alive, no matter the cost. The thought of losing them terrified him, but it also strengthened his resolve. The night passed slowly, with Raffi on constant alert. Every noise was a potential threat, but nothing moved close enough to endanger them. By early morning, exhaustion had set in. Raffi finally allowed himself a few moments to sit down and rest. The child stirred, giving a tiny yawn, and the woman smiled faintly, as if noticing that Raffi had not faltered. They were still safe. For now, that was enough. Raffi knew the coming days would be more dangerous. The security team would intensify their search, and the city offered few places to hide. But he also knew that as long as he stayed alert and smart, They had a chance. Raffi looked at the child, sleeping peacefully in the woman's arms, and felt a strange bond forming. It was more than responsibility or duty. It was connection, trust, and even affection. He realized he had never felt this way about anyone before. The woman trusted him to protect her child, and he would not betray that trust. Not for anything. The sun began to rise, casting a soft glow through cracks in the warehouse walls. Raffi allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had survived the night, escaped the immediate threat, and were still together. That was an accomplishment. But the real challenge was just beginning. He knew the security team would not give up, and he had to be ready. As he watched them, Raffi made a silent promise. He would protect the woman and child with everything he had. He didn't know how long it would take, how many dangers they would face, or what the future held. But he knew one thing clearly: he would not abandon them. And in that moment, as the light of morning touched the dusty floor of the warehouse, Raffi felt something he had never felt before: purpose. He was no longer just a man working in a quiet spaceport. He was the protector of two lives that depended on him. Raffi knew that hiding alone would not keep them safe for long. The security team was relentless, and with each passing day, the risk grew. He looked at the woman and child as they slept in the abandoned industrial complex. The child's breathing was steady, and the woman's glow had dimmed from exhaustion, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes that mirrored his own. Somehow, they both trusted him completely, and that trust was heavier than any burden he had ever carried. He quietly moved through the building, inspecting every corner. The old doors and windows were mostly secure, but he could hear the faint hum of city life outside. The sound reminded him that danger could come at any time. Raffi realized that staying in one place too long was a mistake. They needed a better plan somewhere, more hidden, more defensible. A place that could serve as a base if they had to stay for weeks. He spent the morning mapping the industrial complex, noting potential hiding spots, escape routes, and weaknesses in the walls. There were service corridors beneath the building that connected to old subway tunnels, long abandoned but still intact. Raffi's knowledge of the city's infrastructure had never felt more valuable. He realized these tunnels could provide a safe passage to other parts of the city without being detected. By midday, the woman woke, and Raffi could see the weariness in her eyes. He handed her some water and gestured for her to rest while he kept watch. The child clung to her side, their small hand brushing against his as if seeking comfort. Raffi felt a pang of protectiveness stronger than he had ever known. He was not just keeping them alive. He was keeping their hope alive too. Every moment of safety, every small comfort he could provide, mattered. He motioned for the woman to follow him to a small observation point he had found on the roof of the building. From there, he could see the surrounding streets and rooftops, noting patterns in traffic and pedestrian movement. He noticed a patrol vehicle moving along a predictable path. The security team was organized, but not perfect. They had routines, and Raffi intended to exploit them. While he watched, he realized the child was peeking over the edge, curious but cautious. Raffi knelt and whispered, "Stay close. Don't look down too far. We need to be careful." The child obeyed, their small hands slipping into his. The woman stood behind them, her glowing skin catching the sunlight and giving her an almost ethereal appearance. Raffi felt a mix of awe and responsibility. They were vulnerable, yet they radiated a quiet strength that inspired him to keep going. He returned inside and began making a small map for them, using scraps of paper and a pencil he found in the office. He marked safe exits, tunnels, and potential threats. The woman watched, occasionally pointing at parts of the map as if trying to communicate details about the area. Raffi nodded, understanding that they were forming a silent communication. Even without shared words, They were beginning to coordinate their survival together. As evening approached, Raffi gathered supplies and packed a small bag for a short reconnaissance mission. He planned to move quietly through the city's outskirts, searching for a long-term hiding place. The woman watched anxiously as he prepared, and he gestured that they would stay behind, safe in the complex for now. He promised silently that he would return quickly. The child clutched his sleeve, and Raffi felt a tightening in his chest. Leaving them even briefly felt dangerous, but he had no choice. Knowledge was as important as hiding. He moved through the city cautiously, keeping to shadows and avoiding streets with cameras. He found an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the industrial district. It was large, with multiple rooms and corridors, and surrounded by a partially fenced yard overgrown with weeds. It wasn't luxurious, but it had potential. Raffi walked through the rooms, checking for structural weaknesses, hidden corners, and potential dangers. He made mental notes of places where they could hide or escape if the security team discovered them. Raffi returned to the industrial complex at night, bringing news. The warehouse was secure, isolated, and defensible. He explained the plan to the woman with gestures, pointing to different rooms and exits. She nodded, understanding his intentions. The child, sensing movement, clutched her hand but peeked curiously at Raffi. He smiled softly and gave a reassuring nod. They would move there when the next opportunity arose. The next morning, Raffi decided to test their preparedness. He guided the woman and child through a short practice run, moving them quietly through the city tunnels. The child was cautious but curious, and the woman followed attentively. They practiced hiding, moving silently, and reacting to potential threats. Raffi realized that survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was about training themselves to respond calmly and decisively. During one of these runs, Raffi spotted a small group of security personnel moving near a known checkpoint. He froze, observing their patrol patterns. They didn't see him or the group behind him, but he could feel their presence like a shadow creeping closer. He led the woman and child into a hidden alcove, pressing them against the walls. The child held tightly to her hand, and Raffi whispered soft, calming words. They stayed hidden until the patrol passed, the tension in the air slowly releasing. Back in the industrial complex, Raffi took stock of supplies and planned their next move. He realized that they needed more food, water, and medical supplies if they were to survive in hiding. He also knew that staying in one place too long was dangerous. The security team would intensify their search after noticing unusual patterns in the area. Raffi began to devise a schedule of short trips to gather necessities, always moving cautiously and never risking exposure. The woman watched him prepare, her eyes reflecting trust and concern. Raffi felt a deep sense of responsibility. They depended on him entirely, and he could not fail. He thought about the dangers ahead: patrolling teams, surveillance systems, and unpredictable city life, but he also thought about the child, sleeping quietly, trusting him completely. That trust gave him strength, even in moments of fear. That night, as they settled into the industrial complex, Raffi kept watch while the woman and child rested. He listened to the city outside, noting every sound: distant footsteps, hums of vehicles, the occasional siren. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but he also felt clarity. Protecting them required vigilance, intelligence, and courage. He was ready. Over the following days, Raffi guided the woman and child through careful movements between the industrial complex, tunnels, and eventually the abandoned warehouse he had found. Each step was calculated, each movement deliberate. They practiced staying quiet, moving in shadows, and trusting Raffi's guidance. The child began to smile more often, sensing a growing safety, and the woman grew more confident. Following his lead with calm determination, during one quiet evening, Raffi sat with them, sharing what little food he had gathered. He gestured that they would need to rest and prepare for the next phase of their escape. The woman nodded, placing a comforting hand on the child's shoulder. Raffi realized that survival was more than hiding. It was maintaining hope, providing comfort, and building trust. He felt a bond forming that went beyond words. As dawn broke over the city, Raffi looked out over the skyline from the industrial complex. He could see patrol vehicles in the distance and knew that their safety depended on vigilance. He silently promised the woman and child that he would keep them alive, no matter the cost. Every decision, every risk, was made with their safety in mind. He was no longer just a man in a quiet spaceport. He had become their guardian, their protector, and their hope. And for the first time, Raffi felt a deep, unshakable resolve. They had survived challenges before, and they would survive what was to come. The city was dangerous, the security team relentless, but he had a plan, he had knowledge, and he had the trust of the woman and child. That trust was more powerful than fear, more motivating than caution, and more binding than any obligation he had ever known. The days ahead would be filled with challenges, dangers, and decisions that could mean life or death. But Raffi was ready. He had discovered a strength within himself he hadn't known existed. He had a purpose, a mission, and lives that depended on him. He would not falter. He would not fail. And together, the three of them would face whatever dangers came their way. Side by side, united by trust, courage, and determination. The city never seemed to sleep, and neither could Raffi. He stayed awake through the night, pacing in the abandoned warehouse while keeping watch over the woman and child. They had grown somewhat accustomed to their routine, moving carefully through shadows, relying on hidden tunnels, and resting in temporary safe places. But Raffi knew it was only a matter of time before the security team would discover the tracks they left behind. Each day that passed made the need for a permanent solution more urgent. The woman stirred in her sleep, and the child clutched her hand tightly. Raffi watched them, feeling a mix of fear and determination. They trusted him completely, and that trust weighed heavily on him. He couldn't let anything happen to them. Every decision, every step he took, had to be precise. He had learned that survival was not just about hiding. It was about anticipating danger, understanding patterns, and being ready for anything. He had noticed the security patrols becoming more organized and aggressive. They had started using drones to scan the city streets and thermal imaging to detect unusual heat signatures. Raffi realized that staying in one place, no matter how hidden, was no longer safe. They needed a strategy to move when necessary, avoid detection, and ensure that the woman and child remained out of sight. He began planning routes through abandoned tunnels and buildings that most people had forgotten existed. The morning light crept through cracks in the warehouse walls, and Raffi decided it was time to scout a better location. He had found an abandoned residential complex at the city's edge, larger and more secure than the warehouse. It had multiple rooms, hidden corners, and blocked entrances that could keep them hidden for weeks if necessary. Moving there would be risky, but staying in one place too long was even riskier. Raffi packed their essentials: food, water, a few medical supplies, and blankets. He motioned for the woman to prepare the child for movement. She nodded silently, and the child clung to her arm. Raffi led the way, moving cautiously through the tunnels they had come to know well. Each turn, each shadow, was approached with care. The child occasionally peeked up at him, wide-eyed, and Raffi offered reassuring smiles. Even though the tension never left his chest. As they emerged into a quiet alley, Raffi froze. He could hear the faint hum of a drone above. Its scanning lights moved slowly, systematically across the area. He pressed the woman and child into a dark corner, their bodies flattening against the walls. Raffi held his breath, counting silently as the drone passed over them. Its light never lingered long enough to expose their hiding spot. Once it moved away, Raffi exhaled slowly and signaled for them to follow him. The tension in the child's small hand gripping his sleeve reminded him how fragile their safety really was. They continued through the city outskirts, using shadows and abandoned structures to stay hidden. Raffi led them into narrow corridors and hidden alleys, keeping track of patrol patterns. The woman followed silently, trusting his judgment completely, while the child clung to her, occasionally glancing at Raffi with a mixture of fear and curiosity. They had been through so much already, yet they seemed to rely on him for hope, comfort, and protection. After hours of careful movement, they finally reached the residential complex. It was old and dilapidated, but it offered shelter and numerous hiding spots. Raffi carefully led them inside, checking every room, every corridor, and every exit. It wasn't luxurious, but it was defensible. The woman and child settled in a corner, exhausted but safe for the moment. Raffi felt a small sense of relief, though he knew the danger was far from over. Over the next few days, Raffi worked on making the complex livable. He blocked vulnerable windows, created hidden corners, and found ways to move between rooms quietly. They had enough food to last a week, but he knew they would need to replenish supplies. Raffi also taught the woman and child to move silently, hide quickly, and remain calm under stress. The child began to respond more confidently, following his instructions with small, deliberate movements. The woman adapted quickly as well, watching Raffi and mimicking his actions. One evening, Raffi heard faint footsteps approaching the building. He froze, listening intently. The patrols were closer than usual, more methodical, and more persistent. He motioned for the woman and child to stay hidden in a secure room, then moved silently to an observation point overlooking the street. 2 security officers were checking the perimeter, moving slowly with handheld scanners. Raffi counted their steps, noting their patterns and timing. He realized they could remain hidden as long as they stayed patient and alert. The hours passed slowly. Raffi remained vigilant, listening to the distant hum of traffic and occasional sirens, calculating the patrol's movements. The woman and child remained in their hiding spot, calm and quiet, trusting him completely. Raffi felt a surge of responsibility stronger than anything he had ever experienced. Their lives depended on his judgment, and he could not afford a single mistake. When the patrols finally moved away, Raffi signaled for the woman and child to follow him. They practiced moving quietly through the complex, checking for weaknesses in doors and walls, and ensuring escape routes were clear. The child's small hand slipped into Raffi's for guidance, and the woman stayed close, her glowing skin reflecting faintly in the dim light. It was a delicate balance of training, preparation, and reassurance. Despite the tension, Raffi found moments of hope. He would sit with the woman and child, sharing small pieces of food, water, or blankets. He would gesture comfort and safety, and in return, the child would offer a small smile, and the woman would place a hand on his arm in gratitude. These moments reminded him why he continued to fight for their safety. They were not just hiding, they were surviving together, forming bonds stronger than fear. But danger was never far away. One afternoon, while Raffi was inspecting the complex, he heard the unmistakable sound of approaching vehicles. His heart raced. He quickly guided the woman and child into a secure room and listened closely. The hum of engines grew louder, and soon a group of security personnel appeared outside. They were methodical, checking windows and doors, scanning the building for signs of life. Raffi held his breath, calculating their movements and waiting for an opportunity to move. Hours passed. The officers searched every accessible part of the complex, using scanners and checking every corner. Raffi stayed perfectly still, keeping the woman and child calm. Finally, The patrols moved on, and Raffi allowed himself a slow exhale. He knew that these encounters would only become more frequent and dangerous. Their survival depended on constant vigilance, careful planning, and quick thinking. Raffi realized they could not stay in the residential complex indefinitely. They needed a long-term plan, a secure location far from patrols, cameras, and the city's chaos. He began scouting options in his mind, considering abandoned buildings, underground tunnels, and isolated industrial zones. Every potential location had risks, but he needed one that could protect the woman and child for an extended period. That night, Raffi sat with them in their hiding spot, sketching maps of potential escape routes and safe zones. The woman watched silently, occasionally pointing to areas she had seen outside, her gestures adding to his understanding. The child played quietly, following Raffi's movements with wide eyes, absorbing every detail. Raffi felt a deep bond forming, one that was unspoken but undeniable. They were no longer strangers. They were a team bound by trust and the shared need to survive. As dawn broke, Raffi made a decision. They would move to a new location within the next 2 days, using the cover of night to avoid detection. They would travel through hidden tunnels, abandoned streets, and secluded alleys. Raffi would lead them, relying on his knowledge, intuition, and careful observation. The woman would assist in keeping the child calm and following instructions, and the child, small and observant, would learn to navigate the dangers alongside them. The days ahead promised danger, uncertainty, and relentless pursuit. Yet Raffi felt a sense of purpose stronger than fear. He had discovered courage he didn't know he possessed, a resolve that grew with each decision to protect the woman and child. They were relying on him completely, and he would not fail. Together, they would survive, one careful step at a time. The city was quiet that night, but Raffi's mind was anything but. He sat in the corner of the abandoned complex, listening to the faint hum of distant vehicles, the occasional echo of footsteps, and the soft breathing of the child asleep in the woman's arms. Days of hiding, moving through tunnels, and narrowly escaping patrols had taken their toll. He was exhausted, yet he couldn't allow himself to rest completely. Their safety depended on constant vigilance, and any lapse could be fatal. Raffi looked at the woman, her glow dimmed but steady. She had grown stronger through their ordeal, more confident in their movements, more trusting in his guidance. And the child, small, curious, and cautious, had learned to follow instructions, to remain quiet, to trust Raffi completely. They had become a team in the truest sense, surviving not just through skill, but through mutual trust and care. Raffi realized that their bond had become unbreakable, even under the constant threat of danger. Suddenly, a faint vibration filled the air. Raffi froze, listening intently. The sound was unlike anything he had heard from patrols or city traffic. It was deep, resonant, almost pulsating, and it seemed to come from above the building. He motioned for the woman and child to remain still and silent. The child's small hand trembled slightly against hers, but she held it firmly, offering silent comfort. Raffi's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm. Then the room seemed to shimmer. Light filled the space, soft but intense, and a figure appeared. The woman stirred, her eyes widening, and the child clutched her tighter. Raffi's instincts screamed for caution, but he couldn't move quickly enough to hide them. The figure stepped forward, graceful and otherworldly. It was the child's mother, an alien presence, unlike anything Raffi had ever seen. Her skin glowed with a soft luminescence, her eyes deep and knowing, and her voice resonated in a way that felt both soothing and commanding. Raffi felt a mixture of awe, fear, and confusion. The alien mother looked directly at the child, and the child's tiny face lit up, reaching toward her. She knelt gracefully, gathering the child into her arms. Raffi watched in silence, unsure whether to act or remain still. The woman, who had been caring for the child for so long, looked equally stunned. Her gaze met Raffi's, and for a moment, they shared unspoken understanding. They had all been fighting for this moment. But the outcome was no longer entirely in Raffi's hands. The alien mother's voice filled the room, gentle but firm. She spoke in a language Raffi could not understand, yet the meaning was clear. She had come to claim her child. Raffi's heart clenched. He had fought tirelessly to protect this small life, keeping them hidden from danger, teaching them to survive, and forming an unbreakable bond. Now, that bond would be tested in a way he had never imagined. The woman stood silently, her expression unreadable, as the alien mother held the child close. The child reached out instinctively toward Raffi, and he knelt, placing a hand gently on the small back. "I've kept you safe," he whispered, though the words felt inadequate. "I've protected you." The child's eyes shone with trust and recognition, and for a brief moment, Raffi wondered if they understood the depth of his care. The alien mother regarded him calmly, her glowing eyes filled with wisdom and authority. She gestured toward the child, then toward Raffi. It was a silent communication, a recognition of what had been done. Raffi realized that she understood. She knew he had protected her child when others could not, that he had faced dangers, and that he had risked everything. The acknowledgement did not ease the ache in his chest, but it brought a strange sense of peace. Raffi slowly stood, giving the child to the mother's arms. The child clung for a moment longer to Raffi, a small, desperate grip that spoke of trust, fear, and love. He held on to the moment, memorizing it, understanding that their paths were now diverging. The alien mother lifted the child gently, cradling them with a grace that made Raffi feel both relief and sorrow. He had done what he had set out to do: keep the child alive, keep them safe, and keep their hope intact. The woman watched the exchange silently, her hand resting on Raffi's arm. She seemed to understand the significance of what had happened. Raffi realized that their survival had not been just about evading the security team. It had been about preparing the child for this moment, keeping them strong, resilient, and alive until they could be reunited with their mother. The journey had tested them all, but it had succeeded in the most important way. The alien mother's gaze lingered on Raffi, and he felt a wave of gratitude and recognition. He had risked everything, yet she understood the depth of his efforts. She nodded slightly, and Raffi knew that the acknowledgement was enough. His role had been vital, even if it was coming to an end. The woman gently guided him back, giving him a small, reassuring smile. They had all endured, all survived, and now the child was safe in the arms of the one they belonged to. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Raffi watched as the alien mother and child prepared to leave. The woman placed a comforting hand on Raffi's shoulder, and he nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion, relief, and fulfillment. He had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty, and he had succeeded in protecting lives that depended entirely on him. And now, though the child would no longer remain with him,